Hello, world. One of the most underappreciated aspects of a good product team is their cohesion or their ability to work together. That's why I love my conversation today with Jason Chen, the co founder over at Trestle. Jason and I really got to unpack what makes a cohesive product team and how that leads to excellent product collaboration. So, without further ado, let's let Jason take it away. Jason, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to start with a fun question. What's been your favorite piece of advice that you've received about collaborating in product?
Collaborating in product um, has always been sort of like a multidisciplinary uh, concept to me. Um, I've worked with a lot of product developers in the past, and probably the best piece of advice is to simply always think of the end user, right? I think product development is really about empathy for your target audience. And it doesn't matter like what kind of discipline you are responsible for in the organization or the team that you're working with. All of us at the end of the day are end users of something. And so we all have our own very specific experiences that we can contribute to whatever you might be building, you know. Um, and so that's always stuck with me, and thinking about that. And like, if you are somebody who is contributing to a product directly, for whatever discipline you're in, design, engineering, strategy, marketing, um, you can apply the lens of your expertise to your own experience as a user of something, right? Say everybody uses Google to a certain extent, right? And for the most part, you can assume that everyone uses Google in a very similar way that you do. But you're probably doing things on Google that are specific to your particular use case. Maybe you use Google primarily to do research for your hobbies, or maybe you're doing it primarily to shop, right? Those two ultimately are nuanced experiences that, if you're an engineer, how would you apply your engineering expertise to make Google better for your particular use case? You can bring those things to the conversations that you're having in the workplace, and that'll only make the end product of whatever you're producing that much better.
I love that. Starting with the user, remembering the user. We hear it often, but it's such a critical thing to be remembering while you're building. Because I think the temptation is to kind of go heads down and be like, I know everything. I'm going to build. I'm going to do what I want.
Right.
And that's where you get that like drift from what was actually valuable for people.
I'd also add that like the other end of that is also kind of a risk, where you don't want to end up waiting for the person who's charged with user research to finish their research before you start having these conversations. Of course, there's like concerted effort in any sort of product development strategy to do user research, but that's, to me, a lot of that is really just to confirm the hypotheses that and like the assumptions that you're bringing to the table from
Mhm.
your own experiences as a user.
I love that. That getting out of the office mentality and talking to people, it's important for everybody. And
For
kind of
sure.
on that note, I'd love to learn a little bit more. What's your background been? Kind of, can you explain that for everybody?
Yeah. I started coding back in like 2010 on a professional basis. And, since then I've moved from, just sort of like a script kiddie type of contract worker to, what I'm doing now, which is, head of engineering at my own startup, Trestle. And everywhere along the way, I feel like I've collected experiences simply with the variety of audiences with the companies that I work for. Um, the very first company that I worked for was a special effects studio. And there they just had like a huge amount of tooling, right? Nothing that you would really necessarily associate with like SaaS development, so to speak, right? Which is primarily what I'm focused on now. But I think back to those that particular experience a lot, 15 years later, simply because there's so many things that I learned um, in that starting point that sort of shaped the way that I think about code and how code applies to product development today. Um, some of those things would simply just be like, how do you prioritize the code that you're going to write? How do you plan the things that you're going to build? Um, a lot of this is comes down to just like how do you interact with your stakeholders. I think that's ultimately what the theme has been. Is when I moved from this special effects studio, my follow up job was the another startup. Um, well, I guess my first startup in Pittsburgh, where I actually don't really remember what we were building, but we were building some sort of CRM for businesses, um, and like that experience, it just like there were no defined requirements anywhere. It was my first foray into startups, and to be honest, I probably wasn't mature enough as a professional to be able to navigate that particular role with a high degree of success. Um, and so uh, I sort of took that as a cue to move into a more structured environment. Got a job at advertising marketing agency, and there, really fell into the whole cycle of account management and client work, um, and being able to solve very very specific problems for clients. And I think like that sort of structured environment really gave me the space to explore the technical aspect of what I was doing as a coder, right? Sounds kind of redundant. If you're coding, of course, you're exploring technical uh, interests. But I think what it really did was it relieved me of all of the extra stuff, right? All of the non-technical stuff. I now had an account manager that I could rely on, a project manager that I could rely on, a designer that I could rely on, so that I could localize all of my decision making to just the code and engineering components. And I think that's the stage in my career where I really started to develop a preference for web development. And it kind of made me fall in love with the idea that web is a, a surface of uh, technical products that anybody can access, right? As long as you have an internet connection and some sort of device that can access a website, you could access the things that I built, right? And so that sort of like democratic, uh, uh, I guess, aspect of web development was really what I was drawn to. Um, Following that, moved on to a much larger corporation, a video game company in Southern California, which is where I live now. Um, and that was just another step into structured environments, right? This very very large corporation. Now the number of stakeholders that I was dealing with internally was multiplied, and I think it provided a different challenge. But again, not really a technical one, right? This was more about how do I deal with other team leads? How do I deal with entire departments? How do I deal with like numerous executives that are all demanding various things? Um, and I feel like the theme of my career development has always been I love code, and that's what I want to focus my time on. But in order to focus my time on that stuff, right, I need to be able to handle all the non-technical, less interesting stuff with success. And I think you can't ignore the sort of people management aspect, the empathetic aspect of your job as an engineer in order to be a successful engineer. Now, I have gotten back into startups. Now I've like gotten to a point of professional maturity where I feel like I can sort of handle, uh, managing a team, managing product, managing business directives, establishing those directives, uh, where I feel confident enough to be able to draw upon these previous experiences and pursue that kind of stuff. The freedom that I enjoy now as a co-founder um, is, I think, something that's earned. I feel like, not to uh, you know rag on anybody who's only been in startups their entire career, but there's something to be said about experiencing both sides, right? Having experience working as part of a corporation, I think, only bolsters your decision making when you are presented with a over overflowing bucket of decisions that you have to make on a daily basis.
I love that. I love that framing. That's like I hear from a lot of startup people who are like, we move fast and we make decisions, and I can never work in corporate because we don't get to do that. But
Right.
I think that's a good kind of distinction there, where you are sort of like, if you think the startup fire hose is big, imagine if you multiplied it by 1,000, right? And you get that corporate sort of fire hose, and it might move a little slower, but it doesn't make it any less overwhelming in terms of
Right.
managing those expectations and dealing with that. Um, I also liked what you were saying kind of earlier, where your planning process and your maturity to like not just think of the code, but think of like all the other pieces has sort of developed over time. Can you give us like an example of like maybe something early in your career that would have felt overwhelming that now you're like, got it, I can figure this out, no problem.
There was a project that I was given to develop a new store locator. This was at the marketing agency, um, and the store locator was a replacement for a previous store locator that just was running too slow, didn't have the processes in place for keeping the data up to date. Um, and I remember when I received the project, all I could think about was like this is an opportunity to learn something new. That was the first time I had ever had to deal with geospatial data, geographic data, um, and like rendering maps and like map interactivity, um, and it was all very, very exciting for me, right? But my interest and all of my energy was hyper focused on just the engineering challenges of it, right? And I had completely ignored the sort of human aspect of how do you maintain this thing long term, right? How do you provide the like what do you do for users that run into edge cases where they're searching for geocoded locations that don't provide any results, or if something is if like a location is closed down, right? How do you communicate that stuff? At the time, I had an account manager who more than did like went over what they were required to do in order to cover those things that I was essentially ignoring. Um, and I think in retrospect, like my almost willful ignorance, because of how interested I was on the engineering challenges, actually caused a lot of delay. Because I was building things that they weren't asking for. I was ignoring the things that they were asking for. And ultimately, it was kind of like pulling teeth when it came to establishing like the maintenance process, building out the CMS part of it so that they could easily, update the data without a lot of headache. the process that I ended up implementing for them really didn't take that into account. I think I didn't even consider the staff, like the client themselves, as an end user. I was really only thinking of the client's own users as end users, the people who would actually be searching for locations. Um, and I feel like that's really just, it comes down to ignorance, right? It's like the inability to account for all the different aspects of something that you're delivering. Um, Today, uh, we're building something very similar. Actually, we're building a service area locator for customers of Trestle. And it requires a lot of the same stuff. It requires a lot of the same engineering implementations. Technology has obviously improved since the store locator project, but for the most part, the engineering concepts are pretty much all the same. Um, and so today, considering all the people that might interface with the particular thing that you're working with, not just the end users, but also Trestle staff, right? How am I as an end user going to be updating, say like the GeoJSON boundaries within the map implementation, so that we're always rendering the correct boundaries for a particular district or county. You know, that kind of stuff changes almost on a daily basis if the data set is large enough. You know, so really taking into account, I think we can sort of put bucket it all under maintenance, right? Like ongoing maintenance. Who are all the people that have to interface with the thing moving forward? Make it easier for your future self, and that'll only add value to the end user's experience.
Yeah, it's always funny. I feel like how things you do earlier in your career kind of come back to haunt you a little bit. Like I
A
feel like
little
I've
bit,
I've
yeah.
done the same 10 projects over and over, and it's kind of
Right.
funny how that goes.
Yeah.
But um, I was going to ask is there anything you would have like knowing what you know now, right? Could you go back to young Jason and be like, hey, here's what I would do differently, or here's how I would coach you? Or really is it School of Hard Knocks? Like you kind of have to go through that experience and then have that like retrospective to be like, oh, I could have done that better.
I think it's always easier in retrospect to say, "Oh, I could have not made that mistake." But a lot of what I imagine current Jason would say to previous Jason, younger Jason, is, "Hey, don't forget this thing. Hey, are you paying attention to this other thing?" You know, I think like maybe it was pride, maybe it was ego, but young Jason thought that he was covering all of his bases, right? And the thing that really stands out to me when I think about previous experiences and like trying to draw lessons from them is uh, answering the question of didn't what was I responsible for, or what should I have contributed to that I didn't, and if I were to apply that to whatever I'm working on today, is it within my capacity, right? It's not even a question about responsibility. Is it within my capability to contribute to that aspect of it, right? And I feel like that's important for most professionals of any discipline, right? Because ultimately, I think business, to oversimplify, is based in human interaction, right? Communication, right? And if you can't properly convey an idea or a directive to another person, um, that only slows down progress. You know, that's a muscle that everyone should exercise, regardless of what they're doing. But in order to do that properly, you really have to have a good understanding of what your capability is and how that matches with your responsibility, right? The responsibility of your particular role. And even if it's something that you're not responsible of, you should consider if you are capable of doing it, right? Or communicating it, uh, why not? You know, and I feel like that's a great way to challenge yourself as you grow through your career, as you progress through your career, into discovering, skills or even interests that you may not even have considered previously. When I was younger, I really thought that programming and engineering was the thing that I was going to focus my entire career on, right? And like all the other stuff, that's someone else's deal, product development, design, whatever. I'll always have somebody else do that part for me, you know. Um, but uh, there, since then, between that time and now, I've more than contributed to design work, product strategy, even marketing, and I'm sure what I've done in those regards hasn't necessarily contributed directly to what was finally delivered, but I think the participation aspect of it, right, definitely gives others, at the very least, food for thought to, consider what they are working on in a different, from a different perspective. You know, you'll often hear like more mature, I think, product experts say, "Oh, let's bring in engineering, right, for this particular thing," because they probably have some insight into this aspect of what we're delivering that someone from marketing might not have, and vice versa. You know, um, so I think it's just about like providing as much variety. Like you wanna sort of replicate the variety that you see in a well constructed team within yourself.
Yeah, I dig that. That almost like that ownership mentality, right? Of like we're all part of the same team. We're responsible not just for our little slice, but for the end result of the entire experience, right?
Right.
And the more we can tap into all those different disciplines
Right.
and
Yeah.
help out when we can. It's I've rarely seen it framed as like mutually beneficial, which I love about what you're doing. Which
Mm.
it's not just good for the product; it's good for you too. Like
Yeah.
as your career and your skills expand,
For sure.
and as you become like a more mature, like this is the path to maturity as a product professional. Mhm.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing this a lot today with like vibe coding and like AI, where like you have a team of one now, right?
Right.
Or one person who's expected to do everything, and that's sort of in contrast to your experience and a lot of experiences where it's like I had an account manager, I had a designer, I had like a team around me that
Hmm.
could I could delegate some thinking to. They were responsible for this part. I could do this. I could focus. How do you see that like becoming more and more common where you're going to have just these single teams? And do you think that their products that they're going to be able to ship are going to have the robustness that like something a team could ship?
I think people are attempting to reduce their personnel resources for cost reasons. They
Mhm.
see an opportunity there to, either reallocate or retain their financial resources. But I think ultimately, vibe coding, AI, you know, is just another stepping stone in the evolution of what I would call product development tooling, right? Or engineering tooling. Um, and sure, it does offer the opportunity to have each individual do more, right? And potentially expand what they're affecting beyond their particular expertise, right? An engineer could ask AI or prompt AI today to turn a wireframe into code, right? Or for AI to generate a reasonably well-formed design for a web page or something, um, thus eliminating the need, right, for a designer theoretically. Um, but I think uh, maybe in its current form, what you get on the other end is just generic experiences or generic output, uh, depending on how skilled this person is at prompt engineering or vibe coding. Um, but I think like as time moves forward, there will always, like, regardless of how consolidated these, or let me phrase it as like stacking responsibilities onto individuals, right? If you have if you're able to reduce like a multi-discipline team down to a single person because they successfully vibe code something, right? They're able to like generate a whole ass product or feature uh, all on their own, right? I think there will still be a necessity for communication. I think business will always require some degree of communication at some level, right? And what we're seeing is sort of the advent of a dramatic adjustment of what that level is, right? The threshold for a business to be able to survive uh, on a communication level that is now much higher up the organizational hierarchy. I think is what we're seeing right now. Executives themselves could reach for an AI tool and prototype something themselves without any sort of engineering expertise, you know, uh, and like that, I think changes the dynamic in the workplace. It changes the dynamic in how you sort of uh, carry out a project from ideation to delivery. Um, but I think for the most part, like communication will still always be necessary in order to carry forth and deliver quality experiences with your product or your service. And I think if we focus in on that, right? If you as a professional who is trying to navigate these AI waters, uh, if maybe your position is threatened by AI, I think honing your communication skills will always serve you well. Um, and so, yeah, I think like um, having the what am I trying to say? I feel like what AI is challenging us to do as like proprietors of our roles or our businesses is to sort of stop putting effort towards the things that are taking time and not netting enough value. AI can take care of that stuff now, and so we're sort of forced to put our energy towards the things that actually matter, uh, either to provide a quality product or to preserve our jobs.
Yeah, yeah, that resonates a lot with our experience as well. I think I really liked what you're saying about communication and that becoming sort of the crux of really everything, right? And whether you're talking to, I mean, ultimately you got to sell the thing, right? So you need to be able to
Right.
communicate the product experience right out, and you can't use it. Well, you can use some LLM for that, but it's still ultimately a communication problem. But even internally in the team, it's like all these different rituals and practices, especially around prototyping, are gonna emerge, and that just feels we're already starting to see that. I think
Mhm.
we've got PMs now who bring us like a bolt prototype versus
Right.
before it was like a PRD, right? And it just makes the conversation faster, but
Mhm.
it signals intent and like understanding so much quicker as well.
For sure.
One challenge though that we've seen is so the PM can go to Bolt or V0 or something and have the prototype done. They still don't know how it was built though. Like they just see output, right? And
Sure.
so
Yeah.
when they're communicating technical requirements to us, they're like, it's got to do that. And we're like, well, you don't really know what it's doing still. And so there's still this disconnect between what the output is and like a core understanding of how that got there. Have you been seeing that as well? And like, how have you kind of helped people kind of connect those dots a little bit?
The way that I reconcile that for myself so that I can sleep at night is what I see in terms of, say, like a non-technical person creating a very technical prototype and sort of treating it as a black box, in that they know the requirements that they're putting in and they know the results that they're getting back, but they don't truly understand what's happening in between. Uh, I I look for similar patterns even within the technical realm, right? If you look at coders prior to this whole AI wave, you would find that pattern with, say, less experienced engineers who are arbitrarily installing packages, right? If you were to ask somebody, uh, any average coder, you know, explain to me the detailed nuances of how the Axios package works. Uh, I don't think you would really find anybody who has dug into that particular package uh, in a detailed enough manner to really explain to you the specific procedures that are happening when you're performing, a GET request, and how it's different from just like the default JavaScript fetch method. You know, to me, it's pretty much the same thing, right? Like the person who is generating this prototype and not really understanding what's happening in between, they have enough information going in and getting out from this sort of vibe coding system uh, to be able to say this thing has value to me or it doesn't, right? Um, but it really comes down to, are they asking the right questions, right? I think the main difference between those two examples is that as an engineer, right, you're asking the right questions when you're trying to determine the difference between using fetch versus using Axios's get methods. You know, because at the end of the day, you kind of have to have some kind of understanding of the pros and cons of either, right? So if somebody is, generating prototypes but not really understanding how they work underneath, right? Just the fact that they don't understand, I don't think is enough to discount the value of what they're doing. I think it's more, it the value of it adheres more to what are their ongoing concerns that they're trying to cover, right? Is this thing that they are generating with AI, does it satisfy all of the needs of their end user? Check. Uh, is it maintainable? Check. Is it scalable? Check. Right. If this person knows the questions that they should be asking as it pertains to delivering a product and maintaining it in production, and scaling it with business needs, then I'd say all the power to them. Um, you know, Once you throw in other concerns, right, such as now that this new practice has been introduced, how does it affect the dynamic of the workplace? Yada yada. Are people going to lose their jobs, etc. I think that's where it starts to get controversial. But I would say that that's kind of an aside to just the matter of how beneficial it is that we can produce such complex things so rapidly now.
Mhm. Yeah. I love that framing around scalability, maintainability, functionality, right? Because that feels like a lot of times like hidden work for the engineer, where
Right.
the rest of the org sort of takes it for granted, right? It's something we care a lot about because we have to.
Right.
No one else gets to call at 1 a.m. when the site's down, right? It's the engineer who does,
Yeah.
and so we care much more about this. Um, are there advice that you give to product people to be like, hey, we need to think about these things too? It's not just like 2 + 2 = 4. We've got a future that works. It's the rest of this technology equation that we need to be thinking about.
I think the worst position to be in, as a business owner, but also as like a product owner, is one where you are constantly reacting to problems, right? Like, I think a lot of what I've seen, a lot of product developers uh, sort of measure their success by how good their um, their fortune telling is. You know, can they predict the future? Can they account for the future? And it's not just about growth, but also about risk mitigation. How do you prevent issues from occurring? And I feel like it's almost like, how expansive is your imagination in terms of imagining all the different edge cases that your end user might encounter, and are you covering them? When you think of uh, covering your bases in terms of vibe coding, right? I think what that really directly translates to, again, is just, are you asking the right questions? You know, um, think about all of the discourse, right? The back and forth that you might have with an actual engineer, right? What are the conversations that you're going to engage with them over the ideation phase, or the planning phase, or the release phase for a particular product? You should be asking all those same questions to, you know, the AI that you're having build your thing, right? Especially if the idea is that you want to replace your engineering resource with this AI. You know, I don't think just because it's AI, it doesn't relieve you as a product manager from asking those questions. You know, all those questions are still very important, and they need to have answers. You know, just because AI um, is making one aspect, right? Let's call it the coding aspect of product development faster, doesn't mean that it's making all other aspects faster, right? Like, if you run into a bug in production, what are you going to do? What's your plan? You know?
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, the bug in production is a good one because, like, if you vibe coded something
Mm-hmm.
and you don't really know how it works, the only way you can fix it is like more AI, right? Like,
Right.
like if
Yeah.
something breaks, and so like that lack of fundamental understanding, like it's almost like operating a code base that you didn't write. I mean, it is like
For sure.
because you're
Yeah.
you're stepping in there and you're like, oh goodness, like I have to scaffold this understanding of what's going on in the system. And so if you're not building that while you're literally working with your AI to build it, you have no ability to really step in there and like fix something when it does go wrong.
For sure.
Yeah.
I think the primary argument for that is, as a product manager, you're having to do that anyway with your engineers, right?
hmm
The engineers are building the thing. They're the ones with the expertise to resolve the bug, right? Really the only difference is that if a bug arises from something that you vibe coded, uh, you don't have a human person to help you resolve it when the AI potentially fails to resolve it itself, right? But if you uh, trust in the intelligence of the AI that you're working with, right? Um, you might go so far as to also trust it to resolve the bugs the same way that an engineer would resolve bugs in code that they produced.
Yeah. You have to hope. You have to hope it all
It
that
is a
your
hope,
AI
right? And I
there you
think
go.
I think like as time moves forward,
hmm
even debugging things in production will start to feel trivial, right? Just
hmm
as trivial as vibe coding a prototype currently feels.
hmm That's fascinating. It's almost like self-healing applications at that point where it's
Yeah,
constantly iterating and fixing
I
itself.
I think we're all sort of relying on is that uh, the creators of these AIs will continue their linear growth trend with how the intelligence of their AIs are evolving, and
Mhm.
so uh, we can bank on the fact or bank on the expectation that the AIs that we're working with today will be smarter tomorrow, or more intelligent tomorrow. Um, and eventually we will be able to rely on these AIs for things that, we currently uh, have reservations about today.
That's interesting. It's funny. I'm sort of skeptical of that happening, which is maybe a hot take from my part, but I was reading about it felt like LLMs were making these really big step improvements, right? Like you had that linear progression as all these new models came out. But then what ended up happening was you got all this AI generated stuff that just got shot out into the world. And now, before you were able to train on human generated content
Huh.
and kind of catch up to that. But now there's a lot of AI content that's also out there. And so the pool of training material is now kind of corrupted, right? Because you have
Right, right.
AI mixed in with human output, and you don't have a good way to distinguish between the two. Which is why I think like RAG got so popular, where people could be like, we have our internal training context
Right.
that has not been polluted yet, and that again gives you another step increase in your LLM's ability to operate with you. But over time, as more AI generated information is put into the world, maybe we've reached the limit of like how high an LLM could go because now it's all recursive in terms
Right.
of what it's
It's
training on.
it reminds me of like JPEGing a JPEG meme,
Yeah.
and eventually you just get something that's so crunchy you don't even know what it originally was supposed to see,
Mhm.
or render. Um, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I kind of get that notion when I hear people suggest, use AI to generate your prompts for AI,
Mhm.
you know, uh, and the immediate reaction that I always have is, well, how is AI gonna know what I really want to begin with?
Mhm.
You know, um, yeah, I don't know. I feel like we haven't yet reached the boundary of, this current, I guess, to generalize, like this LLM sort of form factor, right?
Mhm.
Like where does it max out? What are the things that it is truly incapable of, either because there's not enough energy in the universe to feed into its compute, or because it's truly incapable of doing it just out of its innate design, right?
Mhm.
Um, I don't think we've reached that yet, which is why everyone's imaginations are running wild. In that there's one demographic that is going all in and saying these are going to be our overlords in no time, and then there's the antithesis of that, another group that say, well, it's nothing more than just really complex copy paste, and there's actually no true intelligence underneath. You know, um, I think somewhere in the middle of that, we're going to discover that this particular type of AI is really, really good at certain things and really, really terrible at other things. And I think, just like with most technological advancements that enter pop culture, it will find its place. And the human race just has to figure out a way to adjust to it.
Mhm.
But at this point, it's such a strong force, influencing almost every aspect of our lives at this point, that we can't really call it a phase anymore.
Mhm.
It's here to stay, and we just have to adjust.
Mhm. I think that's very true. It's It's here. You can't ignore it anymore. I think like maybe a year ago, 6 months ago, even you could be like, ignoring AI, but now it's you gotta be paying attention to it. Um, and maybe that's a good segue and shifting gears here back to product collaboration a little bit more because I can nerd out on AI all day, but
Right. Yeah.
I do want to ask you some more questions
It's
about
such
the
an
product
easy
side.
tangent.
Yeah, yeah, it's a good one. It's a fun one. But I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit more about your favorite product team and like what it was like working with them and like what really distinguished that team from all the other teams that you got to work with.
My favorite product team is the one that I'm working with now. Actually, it's a very small team. We have it's myself, my co-founder, who's also our CEO, and then a product lead and three engineers. And I think the thing that I love about it the most is the amount of alignment that we have in almost all aspects. Right? It's like we are familiar with what we're all capable of. Uh, we very rapidly became familiar with everyone's sort of like worldviews, so to speak,
Mhm.
and how that pertains to what we're building. Um, and I think it's really the level of communication, and like clarity that we are all trying to achieve. I think we all try, like we all prioritize sort of transparency in the way that we're thinking of the end solutions, about how we're considering the end users, um, and uh, all that eventually contributes to a very robust process that we've constructed for ourselves. The operations that we engage in, and all the feedback that we give to one another, I think produces a pretty quality output on the other end. And so on a day to day basis, uh, it's really, 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 really easy for any individual on the team to decide what they should be concerned about for that day. Um, and there isn't a lot of guesswork uh, that a person needs to engage in, which I think, reduces the amount of energy that somebody has to be spending on feeling anxious about whether they're like spending their time uh, in a valuable way. Um, and so I would say that like the main difference between this team versus previous product teams is just the level of cohesion. And I think cohesion as an objective should be something that every team engages in, and not sort of just an assumed thing that will organically uh, uh, evolve or emerge with whatever team you're part of. Because when if you're an IC joining a team, or if you're a manager hiring a team, right? Your part in contributing to that cohesion, uh, I think, needs directed energy, right? You need to put like intentional thought into how can I do a better job working with my teammates, right? It sounds so obvious when you say it out loud like that, but I feel like a lot of previous organizations I've been with haven't really prioritized that particular aspect, right? Alignment, uh, as a explicit goal for the team, right? And it's usually relegated to the manager or the team manager to find a way to solve that problem. But if it's just one person, and say they have a team of 15 people, um, that's 15 different personalities that they have to find a way to bring together. you know but if every single individual in some way is spending a part of their energy, even on a monthly basis, right, just discussing, or we do it with weekly retros, where we'll basically give feedback to the organization. We don't necessarily give feedback to any particular individual, but we do voice our concerns and our complaints, and it's usually directed to Trestle, right? The organization. These are the things that we should start doing or stop doing. These are the things that went well or didn't go well. Um, and we try and produce action items out of them, right? That very simple activity, I think, has netted us more value in our process than anything else that we've engaged in as a group. And I think that having a form of that where every team member is expected to participate on an equal plane uh, only makes the interactions that you engage in your actual work that much more meaningful, you know, because now you know how to speak to that person that you rarely interact with, but now you have to because you're collaborating on something with them, right? You're already sort of ramped up on what they care about. So when you have to interrogate them about the API that they built, 6 months ago, you know how to do it in an effective manner.
Mhm. I'm so glad you bring up cohesion because it's something that's I feel like very rarely talked about, but is so critical to like I think of the best teams that I've been on, and that cohesion was extremely high. Like that ability to just you know who's on your team, you know who's responsible for what. That clarity of interpersonal interaction is just so beneficial and just so unless you're really intentional about it, so underdeveloped. And I think
For
like
sure.
you you can almost do like the opposite, where like if you think of the some of the worst teams I've been on, you can almost always single out an individual or a group of individuals who had low cohesion relative to everybody,
Right. They like
and
siloed themselves off.
right, or just were not pleasant to work with, right? And we're just it's incredible how that will just torpedo a team. And it could
For
be
sure.
like it could just be one person in a team of 20. If they're not nice and they're not collaborating, it can just crush any momentum and ultimately like fracture the team and people leave and things like that. So
Yeah.
um, critical, I think absolutely critical for
Absolutely critical. Yeah.
building teams here. But as we're coming up on time here, I do want to ask, is there anything that you want to share with the audience that they should go and check out?
You should check out Trestle. If you are a general contractor or a vendor of any kind and you're looking to make your compliance and risk management processes more efficient, um, check out Trestle at gotrestle.com. Um, we're doing some pretty interesting stuff, applying AI anywhere that we can to get savings for our end users, um, and it's a pretty cool product.
Awesome. Check out Trestle. Jason, thank you so much for your time and for joining us
Thanks for
today.
having me.
Everybody, we'll see you next time.